Hola, ¿cómo estás? This is Cameron. This is the Whole Lotta Calamata channel. I'm going to be reading from the MacArthur ESV Bible today, Genesis chapter 4 and chapter 5, and a little bit from the book of the Apocrypha, the book of Jasher. The Apocrypha is not of the ratified 66 books from the Council of Nicaea, Council of Trent, people that said this is important for people to know, and the rest of it may have just been repetition or conflicted with some of the theological teachings, pulled away from God's glory rather than using it to serve him. So, picking up in Genesis chapter 4 here. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. Going to pause there before hitting verse 3. The commentary for verse 2 is saying, both occupations were respectable. In fact, most people subsisted through a combination of both. God's focus was not on their vocation, but on the nature of their respective offerings. What does that say? I think that's more about the heart posture. Diana Luria ended up writing a book called Unraveled, and she mentions heart posture. Now, unfortunately, I did look up on her Instagram what she has going on in reference to her latest book. I have not read it, but I do want to forewarn people. She does have a lot of physical imagery regarding her physique for her fitness journey. I wish her all the best in that fitness journey. For those people that might be a little bit more triggered by what she's posting and not really looking to see the physical element of her physique, but more so understanding her words, I would encourage you to check out her books. So Unraveled and Undignified are those two books. Undignified being the most recent one I have not read. Unraveled I have, and she mentions heart posture in there. So going back to the text as to why that's important, there is a call out here, picking up in verse 3. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock, his sheep, and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. The heart posture of how you presented these elements. It's said by some, and I might be butchering this, by all means, somebody correct me in the comment section, that the way the partitioning of the offering was gone about, Abel's taking the very best of his flock of sheep and presenting it as a sacrifice to God. But Abel, on the other hand, is cherry picking some of his fruit that is not as good, that is not as pleasant, that isn't the best of the best. And that's showcasing the heart posture as he's presenting the sacrifice to God. Going to the rest of verse, it looks like 5. But for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Pausing right there, God is giving a forewarning. Some would say a foreshadowing. Some might even argue a premonition of what's to come. But he's saying to Cain, you need to change the posture of your heart. Will you not be accepted if you give me your very best? Will I not bless you? Will I not give you that same favor? But you're angry and you're holding your brother in contempt. Jesus actually does, in the book of the Gospels, talk about remove the log from your own eye before you try to remove the speck of dust from your brother's eye. You who are so far gone and wrong are trying to rule in law, but the way you treat your brother is contrary to what's going on in your own life. Govern your own life first before you correct someone else, is what Christ was saying. Going back to a small snippet of verse 8 here, it says, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. I'm going to pause there because I'm going to pick up in Jasher. All right, this is from the book of Jasher. This is the Apocrypha, not included in the original 66 ratified books, but I find it interesting that there's further details in the book of Jasher that are missing from the book of Genesis. So that's why I'm unpacking it. Starting in chapter 1, verse 12 of Jasher, the Lord God drove them that day from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which they were taken, and they went and dwelt at the east of the Garden of Eden. Adam knew his wife Eve, and she bore 2 sons and 3 daughters. 3 daughters is not present in the book of Genesis. Starting with verse 13, and she called the name of the firstborn Cain, saying, I've obtained a man from the Lord. And the name of the other she called Abel, for she said, in vanity we came into the earth, and in vanity we shall be taken from it. Verse 14, and the boys grew up, and their father gave them a possession in the land, and Cain was a tiller of the ground, and Abel a keeper of the sheep. So I'm repeating a little bit of it here just to kind of showcase a little bit more of the further details that are missing from the book of Genesis. 15, and it was in the expiration of a few years that they brought an approximating offering to the Lord. And Cain brought from the fruit of the ground, and Abel brought from the firstlings of his flock, from the fat thereof. And God turned and inclined Abel and his offering, and a fire came down from the Lord of heaven and consumed it. And unto Cain and his offering the Lord did not turn, and he did not incline to it, for he had brought from the inferior fruit of the ground before the Lord. And Cain was jealous against his brother Abel on account of this, and he sought a pretext to slay him. And in some time after, Cain and Abel his brother went one day into the field to do their work. And they were both in the field, Cain tilling and plowing his ground, and Abel feeding his flock. And the flock passed that part which Cain had plowed in the ground, and it sorely grieved Cain on this account. And Cain approached his brother Abel in anger, and said unto him, What is there between me and thee, that thou comest to dwell and bring thy flock to feed in my land? And Abel answered his brother Cain, and said unto him, What is there between me and thee, that thou shalt eat of the flesh of my flock, and clothe thyself with their wool? Territorial dispute already erupting, one of the very first disagreements ever recorded in the scriptures. And Abel answered his brother Cain, and said unto him, What is there between me and thee, that shalt eat the flesh of my flock, and clothe thyself with their wool? Now therefore put off the wool of my sheep, with which thou hast clothed thyself, and repay me for their fruit and flesh which thou hast eaten. Kind of odd that he says fruit there, but it's sheep, so I guess you could say the fruit of the sheep is their wool. But the flesh, obviously, if they're cooking it and eating it. And when thou hast done this, I will go from thy land as thou hast said. And Cain responds to his brother Abel, saying, Surely if I slay thee this day, who will require thy blood from me? Who's going to know about it, in other words? And Abel answered Cain, saying, Surely God, who has made us in the earth, he will avenge my cause, and he will require my blood from thee, should thou slay me. For the Lord is the judge and arbiter, and it is he who will requite man according to his evil. He will repay man according to his evil, and the wicked man according to the wickedness that he may do upon the earth. And now, if thou shouldest slay me here, surely God knoweth thy secret views, and will judge thee for the evil which thou did declare to do unto me this day. You can see it's very old English, older translation, but very important, because all that Genesis says, Cain spoke to Abel's brother, and then it just relays the verbs, the events that take place. There's no dialogue or discussion. Picking it up in 24, and when Cain heard the words which Abel his brother had spoken, behold, the anger of Cain was kindled against his brother Abel for declaring this thing. And Cain hastened and rose up and took the iron part of his plowing instrument, with which he suddenly smote his brother, and he slew him. And Cain spilt the blood of his brother Abel upon the earth, and the blood of Abel streamed upon the earth before the flock. Going to stop right there for the book of Jasher. I think that's the most important element. We see more of what's going on with the offering. We hear it's the firstlings of Abel's flock, and we hear that it's inferior fruit from Cain that he presents to God. So we don't really get that exchange in Genesis. And then obviously the verbal exchange, the verbal dialogue, that back and forth that we see going on. So that's why I've decided to include it. I'm going to pick it up in verse 8 here shortly. Cain spoke to his brother Abel. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The commentary there for verse 9. Cain's sarcasm was a play on words, based on the fact that Abel was a keeper of sheep. Lying was the third sin resulting from Cain's attitude of indifference to God's commands, that heart posture. Sin was ruling over him, just as God had forewarned. So he already told him, hey, if you don't shape up, if you don't change the posture of your heart, you are going to give over to the desire of sin. Your anger is going to kindle so brightly, you're going to burn down that which you cannot replace. Verse 10, and the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer of the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." Makes you think of the rock band Avenged Sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Picking it up in verse 16. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Now it does jump forward here. It does not say where he got his wife from. So again, a missing element of Genesis. This is where that question I had originally proposed kind of came about. Seeing all these different people suddenly have wives, and it's like, did God prepare one for him? Was there creation of other people that are just not discussed? What happens there? Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built the city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. In the Apocrypha, there is a book of Enoch, but it is not included inside the ratified 66 books. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methuselah, and Methuselah fathered Lamech, and Lamech took 2 wives. Commentary on verse 19 indicating 2 wives. No reason is given on Lamech's part of the first recorded instance of bigamy. He led the Canaanites in open rebellion against God by his violation of marriage law. So it sounds like God's law is very much so present and active, but people are choosing through sin, through the introduction of what Adam and Eve had chosen, an alternate lifestyle that God never meant for man to take, for woman to take. And the name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. Adah bore Jabal, and was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal, which he was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe instruments. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forager of all instruments of bronze and iron. So we see a declaration of Jabal, those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Jubal, he was the father of those who play the lyre and pipe instruments. And then we see Tubal Cain, Tubal hyphen Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. I want to pause right there before jumping into verse 25. What's fascinating right here is we see this falling away from God's element, not in just the bigamy, but also in the pronouncing of God's curse. So when he curses Adam and Eve in chapter 3, and as we were just in the middle of chapter 4, we see a curse yet again with Cain. And now, instead of God pronouncing a curse, because it's curse from God, now we see a man placing his authority, placing his image of God, his words as if they were from God, saying, oh, well, it's going to be 77-fold. If you know the Bible, there is a very, very interesting verse where Peter is talking to Christ, and he says, how many times should I forgive them? And it's 70 times 7, or some translations say 77 times 7. This seems to be a hearkening or a callback to that same, if Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Christ came to do away with the old. He is fulfillment of the law by having the Old Testament or Old Covenant replaced with the New Covenant, the new law, the new relational element is what Christ came for. Finishing out chapter 4. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Interesting, some commentary there for when people are calling upon the name of the Lord. It's saying, people began to call upon the name of the Lord as people realized their inherent sinfulness with no human means to appease God's righteous indignation and wrath over their multiplied iniquities. Their sin is just rampant, it's uncontrollable, and they don't have a way to stop it. It's promulgating way faster than they ever could imagine. They turned to God for mercy and grace in hopes of a restored personal relationship. The whole point of the Messiah was having that personal relationship, him paying the penalty that other people could not, because Christ is one with the Father. When it goes to verse 25 for the commentary on Seth, with Cain removed as the older brother and heir of the family blessing, and with Abel dead, God graciously gave Adam and Eve a godly son through whom the offspring of redemption would be passed all the way to Jesus Christ. It mentions Luke 3:38, which probably, if I was to guess, gives some of the genealogy. I might have to correct that post-edit if I'm wrong on that. When it does, there's a little bit of commentary I'd like to explore in terms of Lamech pronouncing that curse. It says, Lamech killed someone in self-defense. He told his wives that they need not fear any harm coming to them for the killing, because if anyone tried to retaliate, he would retaliate and kill them. He thought if God promised sevenfold vengeance on anyone killing Cain, he would give 77-fold vengeance on anyone attacking Lamech. Again, there's that hubris, that pride creeping up in him. I think that's fascinating. Going on to chapter 5. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female he created them, and he blessed them and named them man. When they were created, When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. So you can see there's a loop back, this element of circling back and recapping going on with the text. One of my friends explained that to me, that it's not a linear story. It constantly goes back and forth, and it gives you more details and fills in some elements while recapping. It's almost like some of the recaps you see on TV shows nowadays. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. If you recall some of the other videos, I'll put a link for this, but there is a decay curve mentioned in the ark and the darkness, where it talks about if we have perfect longevity of life in the Garden of Eden, there's this element where there's a drop off of the number of years. But if people were perfectly living with the right sustenance, the right environment, the right temperature, the right everything to help life be not just sustained but thrive, there's a very different element of how time wears on people. And you'll begin to see it in the years as people begin to age either a little bit less or a little bit more. When Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Canaan. Enosh lived after he fathered Canaan 815 years, and other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Canaan had lived 70 years, he fathered Mahalalel. And Canaan lived after he fathered Mahalalel 840 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived, it's Mahallalel. So if I'm slurring that, my apologies in advance, kind of hard to pronounce. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he had fathered Jared. Mahalalel lived after he had fathered Jared 830 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. You're just seeing this drop off of years. You're starting to see less and less and less longevity. Now, it's just a few years, but still, it's important to know that, especially if you plot out the years, they show the decay graph inside the ark in the darkness, which I thought was really cool for a visual demonstration. When Jared had lived 162 years, he had fathered Enoch. Jared lived after he had fathered Enoch 800 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he had fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he had fathered Methuselah 300 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So, important distinction. You're seeing all these different elements of Cain and Enoch. So, Cain's Enoch was not the same Enoch that Seth, through his lineage, ended up having. Jared ends up fathering Enoch. Mahalalel was the father of Jared. Canaan was the father of Mahalalel. Enosh was the father of Canaan. Seth was the father of Enosh. So going down to Enoch, Enoch only lived 365 years. He did not die. But that's the book of Enoch. That's who it's based on. So just some clarity there, because the name is spelled Enoch by Cain, and it's also spelled from Seth's lineage Enoch. It's the exact same spelling. So this is where it gets confusing. Without that distinct call out, it gets rather murky quickly. So I figured that would be good to know. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he had fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he had fathered Lamech 782 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the day of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. So we kind of see this, downwards, down, and then a spike, because it's going back up. It lives longer than Adam's 930. But we start to see that go down again. When Lamech had 180, when Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, "Out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands." Lamech lived, and he had fathered Noah 595 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Again, a significant drop off. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So that's going to be the end of chapters 4 and chapters 5. A little bit of commentary here from the ESV MacArthur Bible, verse 5 of chapter 5, 930 years. These are literal years marking unusual length of life, accounted for by the pre-flood environment, and the earth was under a canopy of water that filtered out the ultraviolet rays of the sun, producing a much more moderate and healthful condition. On the words, "and he died," God told Adam that if he ate of the tree, he would surely die. In chapter 2, verse 17, it included spiritual death immediately and then physical death later. Going from verse 5 down to verse 24 of chapter 5, walked with God was not, for God took him, referencing Enoch. Enoch is the only break in the chapter from the incessant comment, "and he died." Only one other man is said to have enjoyed this intimacy of relationship in walking with God, Noah, which becomes one of the figures in chapter 6. So we haven't gotten there quite yet. Enoch experienced being taken to heaven alive by God, as did Elijah later in 2 Kings chapters 2, 1 through 12. So that's some of the commentary. I hope this has been helpful and beneficial for you. Have a God bless day. Take care. It's a whole lot of Kalamata.